Okay, so I have done some research on sort of, I guess you would say, DSM history. So if you own a DSM like me, an Eclipse or a Talon, maybe you looked on the Wikipedia article for the Eclipse, which is where I first sort of found that they were used in motorsport, which is sort of interesting because they were mainly sold in the US. Small amounts were sold in Europe and Japan, but it was a car that was built in the US and mainly sold for the US. And Mitsubishi never really supported it. You might have seen some of the 1G Talons or some Eclipses that were in the SECA Pro racing class. That was sort of in the early 90s. And Craig Conway, who was and I think still is the owner of Daytona Mitsubishi, which is a Mitsubishi dealership in Daytona, Florida, and he was campaigning a 1G Eclipse GSX in the early 90s, maybe like 90, 91, 92, sponsored by his dealership Daytona Mitsubishi. He somehow met the Fliss brothers, F-L-I-S, who sort of were known for building sort of race cars. And, they wanted to do the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Probably as a sort of marketing thing for Daytona Mitsubishi, like in the hometown, big race, And so they got together, and as far as I know, the Fliss brothers sort of built the car and prepared the car. One of them was a driver, and I think the other one was a sort of crew chief or something along those lines. And Craig Conway helped sponsor the team, and he was also a driver. All right, yeah, so in the sort of early 90s, they were doing SECA Pro racing. And in 1995, Fliss brothers, along with Craig Conway, prepared a 1G Eclipse GSX for the Rolex 24. And I believe it was it might have been the same car that Craig Conway drove, the Daytona Mitsubishi car that had pop-ups. It was a 1GA, and I believe they converted it to a 1GB, as well as doing some other things to fit the GT2 class. They prepared the car for a GT2 class. I'm not exactly sure what all the specifications were for that at the time, but it was competing against sort of like Porsche 911s, BMW M3s. It was a bit outclassed. It had some modifications. There's a whole article that was written about it that showed it had they did 3000 GT front brake calipers and some sort of cool things like that. And that was great. I think they finished 24th without a few issues. It almost set a new record. It passed 50 cars. And then this is where Wikipedia gets it a little bit wrong. So in 1995, they entered the 1G Eclipse. And then in 1998, the same team, the Spirit of Daytona, entered with a 2G Eclipse GSX. I have found on a forum that someone suggested that it was actually a former SECA Pro 2G Talon, the black and yellow ones, that was converted into an Eclipse so that it could be sponsored by Daytona Mitsubishi. It wouldn't make sense for them to sponsor a Talon. And I think that theory holds up because the Spirit of Daytona car has the 2GA Talon side skirts, the same ones that are on my car. And it wouldn't make sense for them to put those, specifically to put those side skirts on an Eclipse, because they don't really serve any aerodynamic purpose, and the Eclipse already has side skirts. So it wouldn't make sense to put on Talon ones. So I believe that it is a former Talon SCCA Pro car, which ran in like 95, 96. And then, you know, by 98, I guess it was sort of still sort of a modern race car. But they must have bought it from someone, or maybe the Fliss brothers were involved. I don't really know. But that car was prepared for the GT3 class, which at that time was still running against the BMW M3s and the Porsche 911 turbos and stuff. In 1998, Rolex 24, they finished in 24th place as well, which is pretty good. 24th overall for a GT3 car. And I believe in that time they had GT2 and GT1, as well as Can-Am. So there was a lot of classes going on, a lot of faster cars, and the Eclipse proved to hold up well. I guess it was described as going very quick in a straight line, but it didn't handle very well. That's just what I found on someone who says that they knew one of the drivers.
Let's go back down to the pit lane and Marty Reed.
Well, guys, you know, we always focus our attention on the front runners in all four divisions, and rightfully so. They earn it. But there's also those teams that come here to Daytona to compete, and the 09 is one of those teams, the Spirit of Daytona. Now, this is a Mitsubishi Eclipse. It's the smallest cubic inch power plant on the racetrack, and these guys knew coming in here that their chances of winning in class were slim. They are in 26th spot. They are over 140 laps down to the race leader in the overall category, but they came to compete, and that's what a lot of teams come here to do. And once you get here, you sort of catch that fever and that feeling.
Spirit of Daytona.
That is only a 2-liter engine. It is turbocharged, but certainly one of the smallest, if not the smallest, displacement engines in the field.
It's got budget rent-a-car sponsorship. I wonder if they just, you know, could be a rental car. You can rent a Mitsubishi Eclipse.
Sure. No, actually, this is car dealer Craig Conway, Fleece, a driver, and another member of the Fleece family, the crew chief, built this car.
The car entered again in 1999 with the same team, Spirit of Daytona, this time with a little different livery, and it was still GT3. Very similar, probably the same setup as 1998. This time it was not as good. This was its final appearance, was in 1999. It finished in 39th place. It supposedly had transmission issues and lasted for quite a bit of the race. It went into the pits and had issues and never came back out. Like, it's pretty cool, especially as a DSM owner, to see an Eclipse GSX driving hard on the Daytona race circuit, especially in an endurance race for 24 hours, you know, up against cars that it's kind of outclassed. You know, for 99, it didn't really last the whole race, but 98, it just proved to last and finished a good place because of that. Same with the 95 1G car. When watching this footage of it racing, you know, every time it's on screen, it's always kind of letting a quicker car pass. So, you know, maybe it wasn't running flat out all the time, because it probably was one of the slower cars on track. But it's just so cool to see. And then looking at pictures of it sort of technically, it does look like it has a 4G63, same as like a DSM engine, not anything else different. I don't know exactly what's done to it engine-wise, but looking at some of the pictures, it does look like it has bigger brakes. I know that the 1G car had 3000 GT brakes. These look like potentially aftermarket brakes. Yeah, potentially like an AP Racing caliper or something. And you can also look at the front end. It has sort of a front spoiler, which I guess is obviously used for racing. And then the headlights are interesting. It looks like they have sort of, not quite sealed beam, but sort of just square, generic lights that are probably easy to replace if they, you know, break or, you know, the lights stop working or something. So from what I can tell, there was multiple SCCA 2G Talons, you know, maybe two or three, or maybe four. And then one of them was taken and converted into this Spirit of Daytona car. And that car, from what I've seen on forums, this is just from what I've seen, I don't know if this is factual or not. It was shipped to Central America or South America shortly after the race in 1999. And I don't believe anyone's seen it since. So it could potentially still be down there, or I know a lot of times old race cars just kind of get parted out. And, you know, people will take the brakes and sort of the race parts and use them on other race cars. So it could potentially not exist anymore, but it would be very cool to see this car again. As far as the Spirit of Daytona, which was the name of the team, so they campaigned this Eclipse a little bit, and then it looks like they moved on to Camaros and I think Corvettes or something for racing sort of in the 2000s. I was contemplating reaching out to Craig Conway because he is still at Daytona Mitsubishi. He seems to sort of be a car guy, judging by, you know, he's in racing. But I ultimately decided not to. I guess this car was built in, they say it was built in a home garage. I would assume it's sort of built in a shop. The Fliss brothers seemed like they knew what they were doing when building a race car. I would assume that they would have a shop, but maybe they just did it in their own garage. So that's all the information I know about this car. If you know anything else, please be sure to comment down below, or maybe if you have like pictures or video of this car that aren't already out on the internet, please, you know, share them or something. I'd love to see sort of more about this car, you know, maybe current whereabouts or anything post 99. You know, maybe where this car is or what have you. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed. If you didn't know about this car, hopefully now you do. I think this is sort of lesser known information about sort of a strange Mitsubishi race car that was only in the US for a few years. And I should also mention that the Spirit of Daytona car with Craig Conway, Eric Van Cleef, and Todd Fliss did show up at other races other than the Rolex 24 at Daytona. It actually went to Homestead in Miami, which was, I believe, an IMSA race or an SCCA race. It was a 2-hour race. The only drivers were Todd Fliss and Craig Conway, and it looks like it had gearbox issues. That was in 1998. It was also scheduled to show up at the Minneapolis race, which was 1 hour and 45 minutes, which I believe was also an IMSA or an SCCA. Same drivers, Todd Fliss, Craig Conway. It says that it did not arrive, so I don't know if maybe they had issues or something along those lines. And then both the Homestead and Minneapolis race, it was running in the GT2 class, as opposed to the GT3 class at the Rolex 24. And then after those races, it looks like it showed up for Daytona testing and then the Daytona 24 hours in 1999, and then it ends there. So that's all I got.